Once this explicit rejection of the fundamental law of logic is seen, none of the passages on the absolute paradox can be misunderstood. For Kierkegaard, a paradox is not something that at first seems puzzling or even impossible to common sense, but which can clearly be explained. This is the meaning of the word in ordinary language. For example, a student of elementary physics is puzzled when told that the weight of water in one container exerts a pressure of X pounds on its bottom, but that half the weight in another container exerts the same pressure or even 2X pounds. The physics professor can easily explain it. College students regularly come up against similar paradoxes in other classes. They are dumbfounded to learn that there are just as many prime numbers as there are numbers. Does this not mean that the part is equal to the whole? And is that not impossible? Others, supposedly more advanced than college students, find it incredible that a day, the rotation of the earth, a month, the revolution of the moon, and a year, the revolution of the earth around the sun, if all three at any time began simultaneously the same split second, could never again, through all eternity, begin at the same instant. The word is used for they are incommensurable velocities. They are paradoxes, as the word is used in ordinary language. But Kierkegaard alters linguistic usage and speaks of paradox as inexplicable. The definition of paradox which appeals to me the most is that a paradox is a Charlie horse between the ears. But that's not what Kierkegaard meant. For Kierkegaard, a paradox is a complete contradiction. We'll talk about what Van Til or what Frame thinks a paradox is. At any rate, they both think it is impossible to harmonize, at least by us. Maybe it can be harmonized by God, we'll see. The absolute paradox, therefore, is the absolute contradiction. Kierkegaard, far from shrinking back at the thought of denying the laws of logic and becoming irrational, glories in it. The point is important, not only for a correct understanding of Kierkegaard, but also for a correct understanding of Karl Barth and the type of religion he has popularized since World War I. Barthianism entered this country, I don't mean that nobody had ever heard of it before, but it entered this country as a force in the seminaries about 1938, when Brunner, not Barth, when Brunner came to Princeton Seminary. And the seminaries in the United States, by and large, accepted his points of view. Barth never came to this country until 1962, when he spoke in the Rockefeller Chapel up at the University of Chicago. And his lectures were awfully dull. I listened to them. I read some of them. And besides, the chapel at the Rockefeller Chapel, isn't it the Rockefeller? It's the Rockefeller Chapel. Is a horrible place for anybody to speak in. The acoustics are impossible. And Barth has a strong German accent, and he gargled all the way down the nave, and it resounded from all sides. And of course, I was with the press, and I sat on the second row. I could hear him. I could even understand some of his words. But it's a terrible place to speak in. And poor Barth, he lectured in English. I think I could have understood it better if he'd lectured in German. There was one word that took me a long time to get. He repeated, I don't know, half a dozen times or more, Wakum. he talked about something in a vacuum. And finally it dawned on him he meant a vacuum. That his English pronunciation wasn't too good. And something also happened there in 1962, really amusing. Barth and one or two of his friends was walking along the street after the lecture, and Van Til and one of his friends were walking. They met, and so Van Til and Barth were introduced to each other. And Barth looked at Van Til and said, "I'll never meet you in heaven." Of course, Barth doesn't believe in heaven. So he was telling the truth, though he didn't mean to. Well, we come to Barth Brunner et al. Before the concluding paragraphs on Soren Kierkegaard, it is useful to refer to his influence in the 20th century. Although theologians paid him scant attention during his lifetime, Karl Barth, at the end of World War I, with what was then called the theology of crisis, convinced Europe of the beauty of the Great Dane. Just before, I'm fond of Great Danes, you know. Just before World War II, Emil Brunner brought the viewpoint to America, where it flourished for 2 decades in the era's intellectual confusion and moral instability. Though it has now lost some of its popularity, there are still hundreds or even thousands of seminary students, professors, and pastors who have sacrificed their intellect and espoused the religion of irrationalism. In Barth's early writings, he made great use of paradox. Later, in his church dogmatics, he reduced their extent without eliminating them completely, and obscured but did not deny his basic irrationalism. The matter comes up as Barth tries to show that theology is not a science, though Wissenschaft does not have the positive overtones that science has. There's a difference between European language and American language, and particularly between German and English. The German word Wissenschaft and the English word science really don't mean the same thing. Wissenschaft is more extensive in its reference than the American word science. By science, we ordinarily mean the positive sciences, mathematics and physics or something like that. But Wissenschaft means all sorts of learning. It's learning in all fields. But at any rate, Barth lists 6 criteria of science, that is, of Wissenschaft. And of course, Wissenschaft includes physics, so what he says about all Wissenschaft applies to what we mean by science in this country. His irrationalism appears most plainly in his discussion of the first criterion, with some supporting evidence in the 2nd and 6th. The first criterion is freedom from self-contradiction. He wants to give the criteria of knowledge, Wissenschaft, of professional knowledge, of scholarship. And the first criterion is freedom from self-contradiction. Now, any rational person, if charged with condoning contradictions, would clearly and emphatically deny the charge. There would be no hesitation about it. But Barth begins by asserting that theology must restrict the law of contradiction to a very limited interpretation.